Frozen Mini 4K, Aaron? Oh yeah, that's you got the best. In my opinion, that's about. I love it. Um, a lot of talk about that one today. You'll see it. It'll be in all my images. So yeah, so giving everybody. Oh, hi Kevin. So Rhonda wants a printer now, huh? So really, just kind of give a little bit of a preamble as we wait for the class to get going. This class is mostly going to be focused on. It's less about giving you all the information you need to know how to print and giving you the understanding of what the 3D printing and resin um, looks like, what kind of considerations you would need. I'm really trying to give people the what they need to know to do this, right? Because to make a decision as to whether they even want to do this, because it's almost a hobby in and of itself. There's a lot of overhead and a lot of there's some cost, there's some overhead, there's some things that you have to deal with. So, and we're going to get into all that. So, um, I'm I'm not going to delve too deeply into any one topic because there are so many things to cover in 1 hour. It's just not possible. I could have a whole class. For instance, I could have an entire class devoted just to how to support miniatures, right? So then maybe that'll have to be another class at some other date. Okay, I think we're getting at 10 now, so it's about time to start, right?
I have begun recording. If you want to do your announcement of how the class is going to go and so forth.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Andrew Pieper, Andy. I also go by Tailspinner. You can find me on the Reaper forums, Discord sites, that sort of thing. I've been a miniature painter since 1992. I've been a sculptor since about 2010, digital sculptor for about a year and a half or so. And I started resin printing shortly thereafter. So I've been now printing my own miniatures and printing for various miniature houses and stuff for about a year and a half. Most recently, I've endeavored with Dark Sword Miniatures. I am their in-house sculptor, but I also am now their printer. So we're doing all that. Anyway, my son is breaking my quarantine sign, I think, up there. Sorry. Anyway, so for this class, this is going to be kind of a brain dump. If you've ever taken like how not to suck classes where they kind of dump everything on you and it's all about how painting, like for Michael Proctor, or my how not to suck sculpting class where it's just a brain dump about how to get into sculpting, that's kind of what this class is intended to be. It's really the brain dump of everything I've learned in the last couple of years about 3D printing and things I wish I had known when I got into it. And so I'm going to power through a PowerPoint presentation. I'll probably show a few things in reality, but most of it's going to be a lecture base with pictures and all that sort of thing. And I'm going to try to get through in about an hour and leave us with about a half hour to answer all your questions, right? Because I fully expect you to have lots of questions, and I can't show and talk about everything. And I don't know what people are going to have for questions. So I'm going to try to leave a lot of time for you guys and to really come back and let me know what you want to hear more about. And I'll do my best to cover it all. So without further ado, we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to jump into the class. So this is Resin 3D Printing Basics. I specified resin because there are two types of, why is my thing now? Hold on, I have to make sure PowerPoint's happy. I have to make it the primary here. There we go. All right. So, too many things open on the screen right now and it wasn't happy. All right, so for an overview of the class, this is a very gross, messy slide of all the different stuff I'm going to talk about today. So we're going to discuss UV resin versus material extrusion, how it works, selecting a printer, figuring out even if you want to get into selecting a printer, resins, equipment and material, other equipment and materials that you're going to need, setting up a printer, obtaining your STLs, how do you get files to print, supporting and slicing those, and maybe that doesn't make sense yet, but hopefully I can clarify some of that. Printing, making a print, washing your prints, removing them from the build plate, and removing your supports, curing them, cleaning the support marks, cleaning and maintenance, and dealing with issues. And then at the end, I've got a whole screen of links that you'll probably want, and I will probably take and copy those into my Discord chat as well, so you don't have to download this if you just want to get to the links. So there's a lot, as you can see from the screen, there's a lot of steps and a lot of things involved in 3D printing. And the one thing that I want you to think about while we're walking through this presentation is, if you haven't done this yet, why do you want to get into 3D printing? Really think through what you want to use it for and what you feel you're going to gain from getting into this technology. It is a hobby in and of itself. I'm not trying to turn anybody off from it, but it takes a lot of time. It takes some investment. There will be failures. There will be cursing. There will be weird chemical smells running through your house and stuff like that. So you have to be committed to that kind of thing in order to decide that you want to get into it. Now, that was my caveat. It's a very fun hobby. It is really cool to see something digital coming to life. It's almost like having my kids joke that I actually have a Star Trek replicator in the basement now, because I have my my Oculus Quest over there. There's my Hollow Suite, and I got my Star Trek replicator here now. And it's a kind of funny joke between my kids and I all the time. So dad's turning into a starship in the basement. Anyway, so there's two types of 3D printing, really. If you really want to now there's more than that, and there's some nuances between the two types, but we're going to really simplify it down to there's UV resin printing, which is what I'm going to be talking about, and there's material extrusion, FDM. UV resin is a process by which you take a vat full of a resin that solidifies under the presence of 405 nanometer UV light. And you build layers by putting a flat plate up against a clear screen and broadcasting images onto that plate using UV light to solidify a very thin section of resin. And you pull away, it comes back down, and it does the next layer. Pulls away, comes back down. And so it does thousands of layers to build up a miniature. All right, that's how UV resin works. Material extrusion kind of goes the other way around. Instead of light or anything like that, what it does is it has a bar, and you can see in the thing there's a little gantry in a bar, and there's a little extruder that comes down, and it kind of draws the layers onto a build plate using a melted, essentially melted plastic, right? That's not actually accurate, but it's close enough, and drawing one layer at a time. There's disadvantages and advantages to both systems. Material extrusion tends to be far less chemicals and grossness in your basement. It does tend to take more space, can be more finicky to get set up. Calibration can be fairly difficult, depends on the model that you have for material extruded printing. The biggest difference from our perspective in our hobby is that the material extrusion is probably only really suitable for large things. I mean, if you want to do big terrain, if you want to build up giant pieces of terrain to put out on your build plate and on your table and stuff like that, you're probably looking at a material extrusion, because you can get, I mean, let's face it, they can make a material extrusion printer of any size. They print buildings now out of concrete using these things, right? So you can get giant ones if you want, right? Where UV resin is kind of limited. I think the biggest UV resin printer now is a build plate of like 10 inches, 11 inches, something along that range. So UV resin is much smaller, but the detail in UV resin is unbelievable. This is a Drake I just recently printed, and I will be showing more detail and things later. But the detail that you're able to print is literally master quality. It's the quality that we sculptors give to Reaper can now be bought and purchased and printed in your own basement, and that's beyond, because every time you cast something, you lose some detail, right? So you can actually have miniatures at such a crispness now that you've never been able to have in the home before, right? So if you know what you're doing, if you set everything up right, if the sculptors know what they're doing, and if you're getting good, that sort of thing. So that's the big difference. So so your first decision point is, are you trying to make big terrain, that kind of stuff, and you don't really care about quality that much, or are you trying to do quality miniatures that you like what you would buy from Reaper or Dark Sword or someone like that, and print them and paint them and have them be beautiful pieces of art? So those are your two decision points. The downside of using resin is all the chemicals, right? You're using toxic substances and that sort of thing, and you have to ventilate, and you have to have them be cornered off. You don't want cats or dogs or kids getting into this stuff, right? Because it is toxic while it's in its liquid forms, and some of the chemicals we use to clean and wash are also toxic. So I'm going to move on. So how does UV resin printing? So I'm going to walk away from FDM. I'm not an FDM expert. I know enough about it, but I know some about it, but not a lot. So I will have to defer to other people to talk about that technology. I have gotten into resin printing, and that is what I've spent the last year studying. So how it works. So you have a build plate. Is my cursor showing up on your screens? Someone just say yes or no. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So build plate. So you have a build plate. So this is a cross section. The build plate comes down into a vat. The vat is filled with resin. The bottom side of the vat has this thing we call a FEP. It's a clear film that stretches across the bottom. It's spongy. It's a little springy, right? It's kind of like the head of a drum. In fact, you actually tune it just like you tune a drum to get the right tension on it. And underneath this is an LCD screen. The LCD screen is clear, and it can turn itself black, and light can pass through it. So images from your computer that we call a sliced STL file of each. So slicing means you take and make it into little layers, and each layer is then formed by that LCD screen, and light is then broadcast by the UV light array through the LCD screen onto the bottom of the build plate, and whatever little bit of resin is between the bottom of what's being printed or where it currently is at and the solid part is what then gets made solid, and it sticks to the build plate more than it sticks to the FEP, and it pulls up away and it pops away from the FEP and comes back down, does the next layer. That's how this technology works, kind of in a nutshell. So you can see here's an image of, you can see the light comes out of these light bulbs. And the reason I did an array is there's usually in a modern one, there's a bunch of these arrays, and it broadcasts the light up, and anywhere it's blackened out, the light doesn't go through. Anything that opens up, the light goes through and touches your screen. Now today, we've kind of had a shift in the industry. You'll hear a lot of people talking about 2K screen, mono screens, 4K screens, 4K projection, 4K high definition. Let me break a little bit of that down for you. So a year ago, all we had were 2K screens. That means there were 2,000 pixels per inch, I think. I'm not sure what the 2,000 pixels were, but it was a 2K screen. We'll just leave it at that. They were about 3 inches. They were like a 3-inch screen. They're about that big. Nobody wanted a 3-inch build plate. The only printer out there that had a 3-inch build plate, to my knowledge, was the Solus Pro. Let me take a little coffee quick. And the reason the Solus Pro had a 3-inch build plate was because it took that screen and put it right up against the build plate so that there was no distortion at all when the light went through. There was no projection distortion. The problem is most people on the lower end who want hobbyists and whatnot, first off, nobody's going to pay $8,000 just to get the quality unless you were a jeweler, and that's what the Solus Pro cost. When like Anycubic and Frozen and Elegoo and all those started making their printers, they were aiming at you. They were aiming at the home hobbyist. And they needed to hit a certain price point. But you and the typical home hobbyist didn't want a 3-inch build plate. So they were shooting for 6-inch build plates. To do that, they pull the screen away from the build plate. They can enlarge the build plate because they're projecting the image up. The problem when you project the image is you lose, each pixel is then magnified and you lose some clarity, right? So you're going to lose some definition, but they're still good. And a 4K, so when the 4K screens came out, a 4K screen is 6 inches, is a 6-inch screen. So they now have the ability to have a 6-inch build plate done just like the Solus Pro did, where it's right up against the build plate like this and lose almost nothing. That's what the Sonic Mini 4K is. The Sonic Mini 4K is the first printer where someone took one of these new 4K screens, put it right up against the build plate, and gave you a 6-inch build plate and a 35 nanometer, 0.035 millimeter XY resolution. That is amazing. The Solus Pro had like a 46. So it's like the best resolution you can get right now out there. The downside is you're still stuck with a 6-inch screen, right? If you hear about things like the Sonic Mini or the Sonic Mighty or the Mono X, the Anycubic Mono X, I think Saturn is another one. Elegoo Saturn, I think, is another one of the big plates. Those are the 10 to 11-inch plates. Those are still getting them with the projection method. So they're happening like this. So they're taking the 6-inch 4K screen and projecting that up to a 10-inch plate. So they're losing some resolution, but they're going to still have the resolution of, say, the older Photon S, which had pretty great resolution. So to break that down to something that miniature painters would understand, the Sonic Mini 4K gives you the detail of a master print sculpted by Julie Guthrie, myself, some of the other sculptors. It can give you the quality that we would hand over to Ron Hawkins. The Photon S, the Mighties, any of those projection machines, the current ones are going to give you the quality of, say, a Bones Black miniature, maybe close to a metal cast miniature. So the older ones, the old Photons and some of those, they were more of the level of, say, like an earlier Bones miniature, right? So the quality has been getting better, and one of the other reasons it's been getting better is that we now got mono screens. Mono screens means that you have they have black and white screens. They let more light through. It allows us to have shorter cure times, because the longer the light is on, the more light leakage happens, the more extra things get cured, the more your detail gets sloppy. So you want to try to dial your light exposure down as low as possible without print failure to get the highest quality print. This is where it takes, when you first get your printer, it can take some really dialing in to get the right settings for you. And I can give, now, if anybody wants to contact me, if you have a Sonic Mini 4K, I can give you my settings. I have no problems doing that. I've done a lot of work. It took me a month to dial this thing in. I'll tell you exactly what to do with it. So if you've got a Sonic Mini 4K, but I can't tell you for, say, an Elegoo or any of the other, because every printer has its own unique characteristics and needs to be handled alone. There's many variables that you got to take into account. Okay, so moving on from there. There's a lot to cover here. All right, so selecting a printer. So if you've decided and you've watched this whole presentation and you go, yep, I'm going to get into the printer. So you need to then decide, what do you want? And one of your biggest issues is going to be your cost. What do you want to do with it? What do you plan on printing with it? How big do you want to print stuff? Do you want to do terrain? Do you want to be able to do larger stuff? Because now with resin printers, you can get some pretty good build plate. I mean, a 10-inch build plate, you're going to get some pretty good, big stuff. You're probably going to, but you're going to have the quality of, say, it's not going to be that super crisp quality. But maybe you don't need that. Because you're going to get essentially Bones Black quality out of those. So it's pretty good quality, right? That's what we paint all the time, right? However, with the bigger build plate comes some more issues, right? Now you've got more resin to deal with. You got a larger FEP. the film underneath it. You've got that can get damaged more easily. It's harder to change. It's harder to wash a large plate. The wash and cure stations only handle the little plates. They don't handle the big plates yet. I don't know anybody who makes a giant wash and cure station, right? Which means you've got to put gloves on and and ratchet the prints off and wash them, or yourself, or put them in the basket in the wash and cure station. It's just not as clean. So that really depends on what you want. So I can't answer these questions for you. You can spend anywhere from $200 on a printer upwards of $2,000 on a printer, but you can get a really good printer, very high quality printer for $350 to $500 right now. And I would honestly try to set your budget around 400, and you're going to get a decent. I think the Sonic Mini 4K is, and I'm not trying to be an ad for Sonic, but for Frozen, but it is an amazing printer. It's got a lot of downsides. It's a cheaply made printer, but it can print. But the prints that come off it are unbelievable. So, um, moving on. Resins. Let's talk resins. This is the scary part about 3D printing with resin. There's many different resins available. As you can see, I've got a collection that I'm showing you here. I actually have about double this underneath my in my resin storage thing. I've tried so many different resins to try to find various different things that would work for casting miniatures, for casting jewelry. I'm also a jeweler, so I cast my own jewelry. That's what that one Blue Cast X10 resin is for. It's a burnout resin. Resins can be tailored to a lot of different needs, and different resins have different properties and they do different things. Each resin needs different settings for your printer, right? So if you ask me what my settings are, and I give you my settings, they're only good for the resin that I tell you that I use, right? So if you want to use a different resin, you can start with those settings and try them, but they may not work for a different resin, right? Resins are toxic. Every single resin out there is toxic, and I want to make that very clear. It doesn't matter if they say they're water washable. It doesn't matter if they say they're eco-friendly. In their liquid form, they are toxic. The binders that change from that bind it into a solid when exposed to UV light are the toxic parts. They can't get around that. It must be in every resin. When it is bound, though, new studies have recently been coming out that it is not toxic anymore after being bound. So all of your cleanup, before you throw anything away, before you touch it, before you don't want it touching your skin. It'll burn in many people, it has bad reactions with your skin. And you have to treat it like with care. You want to read your MSDS sheets, your material safety data sheets. These will tell you how to dispose of it, how to use it. The best way to dispose of these resins is to cure them. Once they're cured, they become plastic, essentially. They're just like any resin miniature you've ever had before. If you grind on them and stuff, they're going to have resin in them, and you should take breathing precautions, but they're still just resin miniatures. Before they're cured, however, or your wash water is toxic, that kind of thing, you got to be careful. Even if they say eco-friendly. The eco-friendly resins are made where the resin portion is actually made out of soybeans. So the end product is a biodegradable plastic, but that does not mean that the beginning liquid product is non-toxic. It is not. And a lot of people don't know that. There's also water washable resins now. I never recommend that people use a water washable resin because they think that they can just throw the water down the drain. That water, when you wash your resin, is filled with liquid resin that is uncured, and when it gets into the water stream, it kills a lot of aquatic life. Aquatic life and this stuff do not mix at all. You do not want to touch your resins and then go clean your fish tank. You'll kill your fish. So you've got to be careful of the liquid resins and letting them get out into the environment. So even if it's water washable, you can't wash it in water. You can't take it to the sink and wash it off. It's got to be contained. You got to contain that wash water. So that's the biggest important thing that I want to tell everybody. So if you're going to use water washable, you got to make sure that's fully cured before you dispose it. So, right. I use alcohol for my wash water, and I let it evaporate and turns into this plastic goo in the sunlight, and I can dispose of it fairly safely that way. There are a lot of specialty resins out there. There are some high temp. There are some rubbery resins that stay kind of flexible. There are resins for casting and jewelry. There's all sorts of resins. If you have a 4K screen, I honestly can't recommend the Frozen, and I'm not trying to do a Frozen ad again, but their aqua gray 4K resin is amazing stuff, and it can actually be cast in the like at Ironwind Metals or Reaper directly. You don't need to do any kind of special processing. It goes straight into the rubber molds, and it doesn't hurt anything. So moving on. Washing equipment. So you'll notice there's a very big difference between the left side of the screen and the right side of the screen. So the left side of the screen is what I originally started with, and it's the simplest way of washing. You go on Amazon, pick up a little pickle jar, you fill it with alcohol, you throw your miniatures in it, and you take the little handle and you just pump, 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 shake, 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 shake. You know, just agitate them. You could get a jar with an agitator. You can put the lid on, just shake the whole thing, whatever. The key is with washing is you're just trying to get all the excess resin off, right? I can't recommend highly enough that you get something like what you see on the right. It'll save you time. You will pay for it just in not having to buy the nitrile gloves to constantly have to handle the goopy miniatures when they come off the thing, because you can't touch them. But if you have a wash and cure machine, you can take your whole build plate and put it in there as long as you have the smaller build plates, and wash an entire build plate at a time, and you don't get in contact with the resins, and you literally don't go through boxes and boxes of these things nearly as much as you do if you do it the other direction. But you do at least need to have some sort of washing equipment that can handle holding the resin, holding whatever your fluid of wash fluid is, and that you can then use to set up and cure and all that sort of thing. So moving on. Other materials you need. I am going to recommend, I use 99% isopropyl alcohol for everything. Even if you decide to use a different wash up liquid, I do recommend still having some isopropyl alcohol on hand just for day-to-day washing of if you get a little on your hands, if you get to wash up your tools after they've gotten little on them. You can also use denatured alcohol. You can use methylated spirits. Some people I know use ultrasonic cleaners and green stuff, or not green stuff, simple green, to do their washing. If you have an ultrasonic cleaner, do not put alcohol or anything flammable into it, or you may end up blowing up your house. That stuff is super flammable. If you are going to use alcohol, just remember, it's very flammable. Do not have any open flames or anything around it. But I personally like the alcohol. It evaporates off. I have a vented hood, so all the fumes from the alcohol just go away. I don't really like some of the denatured spirits and stuff personally because they smell bad, and I don't like the smell of them. And I'm very smell oriented, so that's just my own decision. With the alcohol, I can put it on my hands. I don't even smell like gas all day. A UV light. So even if you have a cure station, a wash and cure station, you should still have a little handheld UV light. And the reason you need it is for hand curing of like your wash rags, anything you wipe anything up, your paper towels. I've used paper towels to clean everything up. You want to cure them and let the alcohol evaporate out of them before you throw them away, right? So you need something to cure them with. You're not going to stick them in your wash and cure station to cure them. So these things are cheap, about 20 bucks, not a big deal. You're going to want a funnel and some paint strainers. You buy them in boxes of 1,000 for 20, 30 bucks, and they'll last you forever. This is to strain. So when you're done printing, if you want to change resins, if you're going to be away for more than a week and without any printing, you want to take the resin out of the vat and clean the vat out. If there's a print failure and you got to clean the vat out, you want to strain that resin back into the bottle. You can't just pour it back in the bottle. It could have little chunks of stuff in that will ruin your other future prints and maybe puncture your FEP. So you want to make sure you strain it through a very fine mesh strainer before you put it back in the bottle. Manufacturers will tell you never to put it back in the bottle. That's a load of hogwash. They tell you that because they want to sell more resin. I don't know of anybody who doesn't, and we all do just fine. You will need, in most of the printers will come with a little plastic squeegee like this. You use that mostly for touching your FEP and stirring and moving things around on the FEP and getting things off the FEP if they get stuck to it and stuff. You never want to put metal on your FEP. You will be replacing your FEP if you put metal on your FEP. You will cut right through it. You also want to make sure the corners of a plastic thing are rounded. There are some plastic razor blades. You don't want to put those on your FEP either unless you round those sharp corners, because you'll puncture right through that thing. Oops, I didn't intend to move on. Anyway, and then disposable gloves. I always use nitrile. I've heard, I haven't experienced this yet because I don't have latex, that some of the resins and stuff can go through the latex. So the FEP is a very thin film. You probably actually want spare FEPs. I probably should have had this on the screen. You can replace the FEPs when they get bad or damaged. Some printers have plastic screens now on them. They don't have glass. And so if you have a resin, like a FEP gets a hole and you get resin on them, you can't scrape the screen anymore, and it'll damage your printer, like badly, apparently. So some people are now recommending that you put over the tops of those screens, George will let us know later if I get this wrong, but like iPad type, the coverings you use for the top of like an iPad or whatever, right? Screen protectors. Some people do that. I have not. All of my machines have had glass, so I haven't had to worry about that. And I am very careful to check my FEPs regularly so I don't actually get spills. That's something you have to do. Moving on. So setting up a printer. As you can see, and mine's right behind me right there, I have built the OCD from hell vent hood for my printer. I do have issues with things like cleanliness and OCD, so I didn't want this technology in my house without being properly ventilated, because I don't want to be breathing these fumes and that sort of thing. Did I go overboard? Absolutely. I went completely overboard. When I'm running the printer, I don't even turn on the fan anymore. It doesn't have a smell. It doesn't really give out too many fumes. The new printers are not that bad. The new resins are not that bad. They've gotten a lot better. When I'm doing my cleanup and stuff, though, I'm very happy to have this ventilation hood there. The nice thing is I can vent my whole basement out. I've got this nice hood built. I actually built that entire ventilation station for under $200. I went and got reclaimed, reused material from a building material outlet to build the cabinet, and the rest is just sheet steel that I put together, and I pipe it right out my house. It's just a fan motor I got off of Amazon, and I just push it right out the side of the house. I love having it. I like having the vent to it. It's also nice if I want to do any kind of other spraying around here or anything else that I want to go in there. The minimum thing you need for ventilation, however, is the minimum thing you'll need for ventilation. I know George uses, and I think this is a brilliant idea. He has one of those little travel airbrush stations that vents out a window, right? You should at least have something along that lines. I know some people put like air filters, carbon filters to capture the vent on the back of their printer. I don't believe that that's adequate, because it's not just the resin fumes that you should be venting. You should be venting the fumes coming off your wash liquid, coming off your tools, coming off of everything that you're doing, right? So I do believe you have more requirements for venting than just simply stopping the smell. Some people really focus on just stopping the smell. It's not the smell that you're worried about. It's the VOCs. It's a lot of the other fumes and stuff coming off, and this stuff should really be vented in some way. So that's my highly recommend that you find a way to vent the area. I know some people put them in a bathroom. I wouldn't recommend that's fine, because they have a vent fan in the bathroom, right? I'm not sure I'd recommend that, because you also wouldn't want to be brushing your teeth next to this thing, right? Because these chemicals get around. So that's my other thing, your cleanliness requirements. You need to have a space that's dedicated enough that you're going to spill resin. You're going to spill alcohol. You're going to have these chemicals in this area. You need to be able to, A, clean it up, get some milk on a pad and wipe it up. You're going to get some that you're going to miss. It's nice. I treat that area as a hazardous waste zone. I mean, it is. I don't. Everything there is very structured. I'm always cleaning it. I clean it very thoroughly before or after prints because you just don't want that stuff building up, right? So if you're going to put it in a spot of your house that is a living space, you got to be very careful and really think through what you're doing and what you need to do. I think I actually covered my other considerations before I got to this, but just another considerations. You don't want kids getting into this. You don't want pets getting into this. This is not. They're noisy. They're very noisy. Well, not very noisy, but I mean it's enough that you wouldn't want it near where you're sleeping. You don't want to run it. You're going to want to run this at night, and it's going to go pop all night long, just loud enough for you to go, I can't sleep through this, right? So you got to be a little careful of that. You want them warm. Okay, you can't print when it's cold. The resins require it to be basically room temperature for printing. If it gets below like 65, you're probably going to print failures. Even down in that range is probably going to give you print failures. Yes, sunlight would be bad for a bad idea for the printer because sunlight has UV light and it will cure your resins on you. If you have sunlight coming into the room where you're at, you want to find a way to shield your printer from the sunlight, and your wash station and when you're where you're working on it, right? So, put some cardboard around or something, right? All right. So moving on. So how do you get STLs? Okay, because once you have a printer, you have to be able to print something, right? And unless you're a sculptor, so and all these links I'm gonna up there called Thingiverse, where people put models that they've created and they just want to give away, right? So there's a lot of stuff out on Thingiverse. One guy was trying to sculpt every monster in the D&D monster manual and put it on Thingiverse for free, and some of them were actually quite well done. There's another place called My Mini Factory, which is kind of like it's like Thingiverse, but it's not free. You basically are paying like $4 for a miniature, $5 for a miniature, and you get the right to download it and print it. And it's a way for us sculptors. I might put some of mine up there at some point. I know Christine Van Patten. This miniature you see on the screen right now, that's one done by my friend Christine Van Patten. She actually has my Mini Factory store that she's done for people other than Reaper and Dark Sword. You can go up there and download and print them. So Kickstarters is another good spot. There's a lot of STL only Kickstarters out there. They do some pretty neat stuff. There's a lot of Patreons where you can sign up and pay a monthly fee and get access to either a single sculptor's or a collection of sculptors' works for that month, and you get they offer extra stuff. There's just a ton out there right now. Buyer beware. A lot of the people making resin miniatures for print there's some fairly new sculptors getting into it who really haven't worked in the industry a long time, and they don't necessarily they're good at making what looks like a great miniature on a screen. Just because it looks good in the render does not mean it's going to be something that you can paint with a paintbrush. They make the eyes too small. They make things too in scale, right? So when you go to print it, it's got too much detail, too much stuff and when you go to try to paint it, it's just a mush of stuff, right? So you kind of got to get a discerning eye to understand what's going to print and what isn't before you invest in some of these Patreons, some of the Kickstarters and stuff. So really kind of, like Christine's stuff is all going to print. Why? Because Christine's had Ron Hawkins and Bobby Jackson and Gene Van Horn telling her, do this, this, and this in order to print it for Reaper, right? And so she knows how to create a model now that will print. Not everybody does. So you got to be a little careful that if you're out there on your own trying to find STLs. Also, obviously, you can sculpt your own. There's Zbrush, Zbrush Core. ZBrush core is going to be a little lower resolution. Or if you want to go with a free software, there's Blender. There's a couple others I've heard of too recently, and I can't remember all their names. I only recommending things I've actually touched. Blender's a little hard to learn. Well, ZBrush is hard to learn too, but if you're interested, you can get into them. ZBrush is about $900 program to get the full thing. Blender's free. ZBrush core is like 100 something, I think. Anyway, moving on from there. I just saw the Hero Forge question going by. Yeah, Hero Forge is great. I've actually printed from Hero Forge. Their miniatures are a little lower resolution, but on like a Photon S, they come out looking really good. At least the ones I did. I can't speak for all of them, but they do print. All right, supporting and slicing an STL. So why do you need to support? Well, so think about what's happening here. So the miniature is being printed in layers, and it's got to be pulled up one layer at a time out of the goo. So anything sticking out, hanging out, or with voids in them has to somehow be pulled by the plate. If there's nothing attached to it, it can't be pulled. So what you need to do is attach these things we call supports. So when in 3D printing, the supports have become your new mold lines. They're the thing you're going to have to remove at the end of the process, right? They're a little less intrusive in many respects than the mold lines are, and sometimes they're a little more intrusive. So you got to be careful about where you put supports, where the supports go, so you're not obscuring detail. But the supports are what allow the miniature to be pulled up out of the vat one layer at a time and keep it all connected to a contiguous base, right? So that's really all supports are. You're going to hear us talking about slicing. What is slicing? Slicing is a computer program goes through and figures out, say you want to print at 50 nanometers or 0.05 nanometers. I typically print personally at 20 nanometers because I have to get the higher detail. I used to print at 30 because my Photon S wouldn't do, it could do 20 nanometers, but it wouldn't give me anything. The Mini 4K at 20 nanometer layer actually gives you quality improvement, right? But anyway, so you select how high you want that layer to be, and then it goes through and figures out what the image is to be broadcast for each layer of those thousands of layers. That's called slicing. So they're basically slicing the miniature up in many, 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 many layers. So there's two different programs out there primarily right now that are like really kind of like the big two that everybody's using. They're both free. Lychee, however, has a pay-for version of it that has a few more features. We're all used to that. So Chitabox and Lychee. I personally use Chitabox mostly because I'm really used to it, and Lychee seems a little like it tries to do too much for me. I prefer to support my own. But Lychee is, I've heard people love Lychee. It's really good for, especially if you've never supported before, because it's got a really good set of AI behind it. This is Chitabox right here with a miniature in it. This screen is smaller than my big other one. Sorry. We'll just shrink that down a bit. So here's a miniature in, this is Chitabox. So this miniature is ready to be supported. One thing you want to think about is the angles at which you support things. So as you're supporting a miniature, you have to consider and I'm not going to be able to get into a whole discussion on supporting. There's a guy on YouTube who does a really good job called 3D Printing Pro, who's got YouTube videos galore on how to support miniatures, and they're great. I strongly recommend you go watch his videos to learn how to support your own. They're kind of made general. The angle at which, so in general, you want the most pointy bits pointing up. If you're doing something like lots of hair and pointy bits and stuff like that, every pointy bit is going to need a support if it's pointing down. So like his claws, if I were to turn this upside down, each claw is going to need a support coming off of each of these if it was upside down. Pointing them up, they'll print just fine like that. So if you'll notice all those little tabs, that's where it's going to put a support, right? So each one of these little blips here. So you just kind of want to arrange it so that you have the fewest supports necessary to print it with the fewest amount of detail degradation. So when you go to support it, in this case, I've got this one set up where I want him. You also kind of usually want to do it at an angle. I never put it flat to the base, and I always print about a half centimeter elevated, and usually at a bit of an angle, because the pull force against the FEP increases the bigger the surface area that's pulling against it, and you get a lot more errors and a lot more failures of your supports if you are printing flat. But if you print at a bit of an angle, the cross sections are smaller, and you're going to have less pull force, and you can use smaller, lighter supports. So in this case, I'm just going to hit all, and it's going to go through and calculate. Now comes the difficult part, where you want to walk through the whole miniature little bit by bit and figure out where it's screwed up, because it can only be so right? And the key is you're looking for islands and spots that are pointing down that would be cut off from the rest of the miniature. I can't go into it in this class. It's just, like I said, I could teach an entire class just on supports. So that's Chitterbox. Just to give you a little taste. But then you would slice that. There's a slicer in Chitterbox. There's a way to set up your resin settings in there, and you would set those up and slice it, and that would be a file that would port out that you would bring over, put in your printer, and then print it from there. All right. So mesh mixer, if you pull an STL in that isn't working for some reason, it's possible that it's bad. There's a couple apps out there. Mesh mixer, I've heard now that 3D, the one that comes with Windows 10, the 3D Print Pro or 3D Print Viewer, also has a good fixer in it, or can be used to fix things that if mesh mixer doesn't work. But mesh mixer by AutoCAD is a nice tool that allows you to do certain things with 3D models that already exist. It fixes errors in the mesh, things that won't print, that sort of thing, right? Also considerations, so you'll want to get mesh mixer. One other thing that I didn't really mention and probably should have on a slide is you're probably going to need a decent computer to get into this, right? These slicing programs require some memory. This is 3D modeling here we're talking about. Yeah, you're not making them in ZBrush, but it still needs a little horsepower behind it to handle them. You're probably not going to be handling this on something on an older PC or like an i3. I mean, you're also going to need space. I personally pay for OneDrive because as a 3D sculptor, I have close to a terabyte of models right now. If you're buying a lot of models, these models are all going to be, hundreds of gig. They're going to be big. At least multi-gigabyte size files. These are not small, and you will use up space. And so you'll want to do something. So whether you have a couple terabyte drives sitting to the side just to put all your models in, whether you get into OneDrive or Dropbox or something and pay a yearly fee to get a couple terabytes, you're going to need something on that score if you're going to have a lot of models, and that's just the way it is. Large models quite often need to be hollowed. If it's a big model, it's meant to be a big model. Whoever sculpted it should be doing that for you, and if they don't, there's ways to do it in Mesh Mixer and in Chitterbox and in Lychee. They don't always work that great. I haven't had great success with hollowing in those programs, but there are people who do, and they have great YouTube videos telling you how to do it. I never need to because I take it in ZBrush and hollow it myself. Anyway, so moving on. Sorry about, I just bumped all over the place here. Okay, hold on. My mouse is, I keep trying to use the scroll bar and it jumps multiple screens. All right, so printing. So I'm going to have to pick it up again here because I'm way behind. Probably going to have to go to a quarter after before we open for questions. All right, steps for printing. So you check your system, you check your FEP, make sure there's no holes in it, make sure it's looking good, unless you still have resin in the vat. If you do have resin in the vat, stir your resin, make sure nothing's stuck to the bottom. If anything's stuck to the bottom, you drain the vat and you start over, and then check everything. Check to make sure the knobs on your vat are tight. Check to make sure that the build plate is tight. Any one of those things not being tight will fail your print for you. So if everything isn't bolted down where it's supposed to be, you'll lose 12 hours of printing time, or 8 hours, or whatever your print is. So then you add or stir your resin, and then you check your system again because you might have missed something. I always do a double check before I hit go. You will fail at some point. You're going to forget to, and then you'll never forget to again because you'll be like, oh, stupid. Anyway, you insert the flash drive with the slice file on it. You turn on your printer, you select the file, and you start the job. That's it. And then you spend the next several hours nervously checking to make sure that it worked. That should have made everybody laugh, but I can't tell because I can't hear any of you. It is actually true, though. I mean, when you get into, especially when you're new, it's like every 5 minutes you come back, is it working? Is it working? And you do want to check about half to 3/4 of the way through the print to make sure that everything isn't like ripped off the supports or something. Because if it is, you can just abandon it. You don't want to just spend the next several hours just wearing out your machine, right? So so you do want to check, but you don't necessarily have to be. So this is what it looks like to print. So this was a print that I did a little while back. Actually, these guys were printing. And so usually you print with the cover on. I pulled the cover off to take some pictures, and it doesn't hurt it to pull the cover off. It's just you don't want extra UV light getting in there. But I'm in a basement, so who cares? And then this is then on the left or on the right is what it looks like once it was done printing, and it comes up and it just hangs there. And I actually had a failure for the first time in a long time on this print. I didn't put enough resin in the vat, and you can see down at the bottom here, there's a little bit of FEP showing through. Well, that's because I didn't have enough resin, and I actually had a failure on one of the prints. But most of it printed okay. This dragon's tail didn't complete fully. So that's printing. That's actual printing. The next step is washing your print. So when you first take the build plate off, this is what your models are going to look like. They're all goopy and filled with the resin stuck to them, right? So there's excess resin on them, so they're all gooped up, and you can't see your details, and they're toxic. They smell funny and all that stuff. When you go to wash your print, you want to ventilate the area now, because now what you're pulling this off, you've got all this resin on there. You don't want to touch your build plate if you can help it. Why do I have a bare hand? I have a bare hand because the only thing I'm touching is the knob on my build plate. So I do not use gloves when I'm using my wash station because I don't need to touch anything. That's why I say the wash station is going to pay you back by not having to use gloves. If you have to touch the miniatures, if you have to touch the build plate, you must wear nitrile gloves. So if you're using a pickle jar, or you're removing the prints from the build plate, and for any reason, say you have a really big build plate and doesn't fit in your wash station, you'll need to pop them off first. You should be wearing gloves anytime you're touching that. Again, I didn't wear gloves here because I'm not touching the build plate. You'll see that in the next slides. I don't. I see the don't risk getting dripped on, so you wear, and that's fine. I just tend not to. I let it drip pretty thoroughly before I move it. I usually let it sit for like an hour after printing and let it drip. So I don't know. You can see there's not much resin on my build plate at this point. Some guys print a thing to make it go at an angle so it drips even better. I don't, but it's a good idea. Again, I can't recommend a wash station highly enough. They're fantastic. I wash in 99% isopropyl alcohol for 2 to 4 minutes with vigorous agitation. That's what I can recommend. I've never done anything but isopropyl, so I really can't talk about any of the other stuff with any authority. A lot of people online do talk about it, and you can read a lot on Facebook. Here's what it looks like when I wash a print. I put the bracket on. I slide it into my wash tank. It sits down just underneath the level of the isopropyl, and you put the cover on and you set the timer, and it does everything else. It's got this big agitator, and it's like a swirling tornado of isopropyl alcohol, and it does an amazingly good job of washing it. So I can't recommend a wash station any higher. It's in my opinion, it's almost essential. And that's what a plate looks like when it's washed, nice and clean. At that point, I can just pop it off, use a putty knife. I will often just touch up clean with a rag and some alcohol. And to get a print off, you just slide put the putty knife at the edge of one of the print, and when I put my rafts on the build plate, I connect them all so they all are like contiguous, and then I can go on one edge with the putty knife and just kind of pop it and get it to just kind of come off, and then I slide the putty knife under it and just shove, and the whole thing just pops right off. I've had it on my Photon S where you absolutely could not get this off the build plate, and it's a pain in the butt, and you have to use a razor blade to kind of really get under there and work it. I've never had that problem with the Sonic Mini 4K. It's come off easily every time. I've never had an issue. I do know a lot of people who've switched to what they call them, I think, Wham Bam plates. They're a steel plate that attaches to, you put a magnetic layer on your build plate, and then the Wham Bam plate magnetically fits on there, and you can pop the whole thing off and then just flex the whole plate and the prints pop off. Okay, I have yet to have a desire to get it because I don't have a problem getting off the plate. So if I ever started to, or for whatever reason, yeah, I'd probably look into getting one of those too. When you're done sliding it off, just take a little alcohol on a rag and wipe your plate down, because there will be a little resin underneath there. Not enough that I necessarily need gloves, because I never touch it. I mean, I got the cloth between me and it, but it's up. Your comfort is up to you. So before you cure them or do anything with them, let them dry thoroughly. If you were to cure a print that still had liquid on it, it'll get this weird white residue that you really can't get off. So you want to make sure before you do any curing at all that you let them dry fully. I usually let them sit for like an hour or two before I start trying to remove supports. All right. So I always remove supports before I cure the model, because the supports are softer at that point. I also always wear gloves when I remove supports. One thing that I've come to learn in more recent times is that one should always heat the model before using it. Now, there's two ways you can do that. You can put it in hot water and heat it up, or you can use an air dryer and do it. I use a hair dryer. When you're using a hair dryer, little caveat here, it will put out VOCs and stuff, right? You're going to get fumes coming out. So you want to have the area ventilated if you're going to use the air dryer, and not sit right over breathing it. Do it at a bit of a distance from your breathy things, right? So to that end, I'm going to quickly show you. So I'm going to finish going through the support screens, and then I want to show you some stuff with removing supports. One thing you want to be careful when you're removing supports is you should cut them off with a side cutter, as opposed to, something like this, as opposed to, or a nice sharp knife, as opposed to ripping them off. You can rip them off, that's fine. You'll probably break small detail on occasion. But the worst part is that you're going to leave pock marks. So if you snip them off, you leave little posts. If you rip them off, you leave these little divots that look like little craters. The craters are going into the detail of your model. The posts are sticking out of the detail of your model. You can sand the posts off, but you're going to have to fill the craters if you want to keep the main detail. So sometimes I don't really care about the craters. Like if I'm doing train piece, something I don't really care that much about, or it's underneath the model and it's not going to be seen or whatever. But if you care about the detail, it's better to snip than it is to quickly rip them off. And I'm going to show you what it looks like. If I can get my mouse to go in the right place. I'm going to switch video on you here now. Hopefully this works. If you want to let them know, if you want to see this in more detail, you can select the little screen, and he can tell you better. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. Okay, so where his video is, there's on the top right-hand corner 3 dots. Click it, click pin video for the video of him actually manipulating his 3D printed minis.
So I'll let you guys have a couple seconds to do that. Yeah, you see the pokey tool because I was painting here last night. Sorry. All right, so I'll let you, if you guys have done that now, so I'm going to move on because we're a long time. So the way I heat them up, you could dip them in hot water. I don't, because I don't like them being wet. I can't see what I'm doing when they're wet. I don't really like that. So I put them in a cup, and I take this old Conair Sears hair dryer with a hot setting, and I basically aim it into the cup and get it hot, and um, get it hot, and it'll move the air around inside there. I'm not going to do it right here because my face is right here. I'm going to come over here where I'm not having to breathe it and heat it up. And then I get my ventilation and stuff can do that. Again, the warm water. So what this is doing, why do you heat it up? The resin gets soft when it's heated, especially if it hasn't been fully cured yet. But since it's not fully cured, it can actually give off some fumes and stuff. So once I get it nice and hot, you'll notice that these supports have gotten really bendy, and these supports on this guy are still pretty firm. When they're nice and bendy like that, so you can rip them off. If you're in a hurry, you can just grab them and go. They're done, right? But you're going to notice that there's all sorts, and I have a hard time seeing exactly, but you're going to notice that there's all these little pock marks now. So filing those pock marks away is going to be difficult, but not impossible. So it's really up to you. I can't do this because I'm producing these for the miniature industry, and they've got to be able to be done well. So, and the other thing about when you rip them off, this tail could have ripped off when I did that, right? It didn't, but it could have, right? So little fine details can rip off. I tell you, some of Patrick Keith's miniatures, there's no way I would ever rip them off because he's got such teeny little ankles and stuff. So what I do instead is I'll heat them up, or not. Don't, on a big miniature like this, I wouldn't even need to. And I'll just come through. Actually, shows why I heat it up. I actually ripped a piece of detail off. It's brittle when it's not hot. It's soft and squishy when it is. And I just go through and go around the miniature with a, but I do go around the miniature with a side cutter and pop each one off. You can also use a X-Acto knife if you want to get into more exacting. It takes a lot more time, but what you're left with are these little posts, and we're going to do the old cooking method. You're left with all the little posts.
You're being
Oh,
asked if you could zoom
yeah, I
out one
forgot.
more time.
Sorry about that, guys. I forgot that I had the zoom in on. So anyway, so you're using your side cutter. Make sure I'm on screen. Sorry, everybody. It's so hard to learn to use these cameras. They're just not intuitive for what you're used to doing, you know. So anyway, so and that's all I'm doing. I'm just snipping or cutting the posts, right? And if I heated this up, it would be even easier. That's all. That's removing supports. So I'll go back to the main camera again. All right, so back to the PowerPoint, and I'll get some lighting so I'm not all totally washed out here because I glow like the beacons of Gondor under that light. All right, so curing a print. You got to cure them because these are, when they come off the printer, they're only like half cured, right? They're cured enough to hold a shape, but you got to finish curing them, right? I've heard actually that for full cure, you got to go. Oh, and you notice I was wearing gloves when I was cutting supports off. That's because they're not fully cured, right? So I don't want to be handling these too much with my bare skin until they are fully cured, right? So I always wear gloves when I'm cutting supports off and stuff, because you'll get your hands will get irritated. So you want to cure them under 405 nanometer UV light for 2 to 6 minutes. That's what I do. I use the 4 minute setting on my Anycubic wash and cure. The cheap situation is to use your little hand UV light and cure it on a rotating light activated rotating thing. I think I got like $5 off of Amazon. It's like a little bitty stand that rotates in the sunlight or whatever. You can also cure them in the sunlight. You can go put them in the sunlight and just turn them every once in a while, and that'll cure them too. Bigger pieces need more cure time. I like using the little, like say the turntable. I use my wash and cure station to cure mine. But you must cure them before you print them or before you paint them or do anything else. Hollowed out models. You can get little flashlights that you can shine into a hollowed out model. I've heard that some guys have bought these UV flashlights that are like one LED on a little tube that can go into the hollowed out model. You do the best you can to try to get in there, right? So shine in, try to leave yourself a big enough hole on the bottom that you can shine something into it. Um, try to get it as cured as you can. If you don't cure them enough, they can. If you either cure too much or not enough, they can crack down the road. So you want to make sure you get them. The other thing to pay in mind is once they are cured, they get a little brittle, and that all depends on your resin too. The one I'm using doesn't get as brittle. It still gets brittle. It's still resin. So you got to remember, these are like any other resin model. They're not bones. They're not going to take abuse. So they're as fragile as a metal miniature, as fragile as any other resin, right? Sunlight coming through glass may not have enough UV because most glass is treated to stop UV light. So you might, I don't know if they'll cure as well in a window as they would if you put them outside. Just FYI. All right, so once you've done that, you got to get the support marks off. It's just a piece of cake. It's just like anything you've done. If you've ever worked with metal or resin miniatures before, cleaning these is the exact same thing as taking mold lines off of those, except for you're looking for little bumps instead of a long line. That's it. I use diamond burrs on my Fordham, or even diamond files like I showed here. Just you can see his elbow. I've already scraped that down. That one's gone, and I'm working on another one. That's it. It's easy. Prime them just like you would. I just did a miniature last night. I'm working on one of my little drakes that I printed. I primed him. I tried using Reaper's primer. It didn't stick. I was sorry, Reaper. The Badger Stylerns stuck really well and looks to be a good primer for these. So, and then my Reaper paints as usual. So, um, cleaning and maintenance, very important. Always wear gloves, always ventilate for anything you do cleaning and maintenance on this machine. You're going to come in contact with a resin. You're going to make a mess. And I even recommend maybe if you don't have as good enough ventilation as I do, you might want a breathing mask even, right? Somehow this is going to smell bad. I mean, your alcohol, whatever you got to use alcohol to clean it up. Even if you're using water washable resin, you're probably going to want to use an alcohol just to clean your tools and stuff anyway, because it's a good it breaks everything down. It works really well to get stuff out. Do not let your resin sit in your vat. You see my resin vat there. I'm draining it. That's the FEP on the bottom with a little resin stuck, a film of resin over the clear plastic FEP. You got to scrape that down. You got to clean it with alcohol, get it completely clean. You I don't this is a recommendation of mine, not a rule. I do not personally allow resin to sit in my vat for more than about a week. I don't have a cover for my vat. You can print covers for vats. You can make a plastic cover for your vat if you want to. I personally don't. Um, I print enough that it's not normally a problem. Um, if it starts sitting around too long, I will put it back in the bottle and clean the vat. Um, Strain, I'll use resin with a paint strainer before putting it back in your bottle. You see that's what I'm doing there. That little rubber funnel and a box of paint strainers was like, it came as a combo pack on Amazon for like 25 bucks. Use wash liquid. When your wash liquid gets to a point that it's just gross, like it's coating your miniatures with more stuff than it's taking off of them, right? You can wash hundreds of minis in a single gallon bucket of wash liquid, but eventually it gets pretty gross. So about once a year, I go to an estate sale, I get a disposable glass pan, something like an old glass pan that's like cracked or chipped or whatever that people are basically giving away for a buck. I pour my wash resin in that. I take it outside, I put it in the sunlight with that alcohol, and I let it sit on my patio in the bright sunshine of the nice summer day and let all the alcohol evaporate out, and all the resin cures into a kind of a gooey sludge, and then I bag the whole thing up and you can throw that away. So I've done enough research. Once it's cured up, it's safe. And I get all the alcohol just evaporates out, and it just basically turns into a little thing of cured resin that's stuck to the bottom of the pan. That's it. probably could do the same thing in like an aluminum pan. I mean, I don't. I have just used glass in the past. Clean all your surfaces of your station with isopropyl alcohol regularly. Any rags that you use to wipe any resin up and should be cured before thrown in the garbage. Any of these little guys that you've ripped off, it's a good idea to cure them up a little further before you throw them in the garbage. We don't want to be killing wildlife. Allow your alcohol to evaporate before throwing anything in the trash because you don't want a fire in your trash can. So before you throw a rag soaked in alcohol into your trash can, make sure the alcohol's dried up. Then other maintenance is you do need to lightly lubricate the Z screws on your machine about once or a couple times a year probably, whenever it starts squeaking. The manufacturer will tell you what to lubricate their particular machine with. I use lithium grease on mine, works good. A light grease. Issues. You will have issues. You will fail. You will fail a lot. You will have no idea how many times you're going to fail before you figure this out. This is not a science, it's an art. Figuring out exactly what parameters are going to cause failures for your printer and how tight your FEP is and how much light you're using and the temperature of your room and who knows what factors are coming in. There's too many factors at play for any one person to say do X and it will work. That said, I mean, you're going to want to dial in your highest detail possible. That means you got to try to get down the lowest exposure amount of light for each layer as possible and yet still have it stick and hold together, right? Some issues are you're going to come in and there's going to be nothing on the bill plate and you're going to find that the whole thing is cured onto your FEP and you got to clean up the FEP and all that stuff. So you have no print. Support failures are very common. It's where the supports rip. They weren't strong enough. They rip off the model and half the model stuck to the bill plate, half is stuck to the FEP. There's a lot of times you'll get lines on a Mini. Well, these are a little complicated. These are called aliasing. It's not actually layers lines. A lot of people think it is, but it isn't. What it is it's the stepping caused by the pixels, the image of the pixels being at a particular angles on a big flat surface can cause you to see little gradations. Now, in the newest of the printers, when you're printing at 20 nanometers with a 35 nanometer XY resolution, the stepping that you can see it, but once you prime it, it'll be a smooth surface. So don't worry about it. On the older printers like a Photon S or some of the Photons or any of them that are projecting a little bit, it's a little more of an issue. The stepping can be, the lines can be a little worse. At that case, you want to adjust big flat areas at particular angles. Usually it's in the 30 some degree range area, and that will cause it to go away. Each printer is a little different. Some people there's Photon group or there's Facebook groups for almost every printer out there, and a lot of the people on them do a search. You'll find little graphics that tell you what angles for what layer heights, and people have done the math. But when you get to the 4K high def printers, it kind of stops being an issue because any of those are so small that you're not going to see them once you primed anyway. Stepping is a bigger issue. If you see regular, about maybe 5 millimeter, 3 millimeter apart lines showing up across your miniature in a horizontal fashion, that can actually is caused sometimes by problems with your Z screw, and it could be wobble in your Z screw that's causing a slight stepping to be. Hopefully it's not something you see right away in your machine. It's kind of starts happening when the Z screw and some of the machinery starts wearing out a bit and needs replacement. You can have problems with the screens. Screens don't last forever. They are considered a disposable part, though on the new mono screens, they last 2,000 hours. They used to last only 200. I've already had to replace my Photon S screen once. But the screens don't last forever, and you will have to replace them. They are a wear part because the UV light is very hard on them and wears them out. All right, so I think I've come to the end of my brain dump. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Here are the links. I will copy these links and put them in my Discord so you guys can get them right away after we're done here. So I'm going to open up for the rest of the time to any questions. If any of you guys who've been printing for a while want to add anything to what I've said, I think you've already been doing that though. Um, I think I've noticed a lot of people have been doing that as I've been going along. So thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate it. I'm one guy. I can't know it all. So I do highly recommend for learning printing, supporting, to go to 3D Printing Pro and check out his YouTube tutorials. There's some other really good ones out there too. And the cat model that you've been seeing me use all this time, there's a link there to Christine's cat model if you want to go buy it. I think she charges like $4 for it or something like that. So anybody have any questions that I didn't cover that you want to know?
There's some questions in the Q&A that
Yep.
you can just kind of go down if you want to first.
Do I recommend ABS or standard resin for printing minis? No, I use standard resin. I would actually use. I like the new Photon 4K is really nice. I've only ever the Echo resin from Anycubic's good too, but the EPAX hard gray is what I've heard a lot of people are having a lot of good really love. I have a bottle, but I haven't tried it yet. So yeah. Um,
Shall I read off some Q&A questions to you?
okay, yeah. Why don't you go for it?
Okay, so one of the first ones, and this is something I saw in the comments too, will the PowerPoint be available for download after this?
Um, is there a way for me to put it in the Discord?
I believe, yeah, you can upload files to
Okay,
Discord.
I'll throw the whole PowerPoint on my Discord. So
Okay.
we'll do that. I'll do that right a little bit after this afternoon. Should be there this afternoon.
Okay. The next question would be Peter Shaw. How much do those settings vary by resin type? Whatever you.
Considerably.
Okay.
Um, there's actually kind of like it used to be considerably, and now it's kind of gotten to be you kind of have your long resins and your short resins. The printers, once they got the monoscreens, the monoscreens are so efficient at letting light through that the settings don't vary as much as they did. So if you have an older machine like a Photon S, something with a 2K screen, you almost got to come up with resin settings for every resin. The newer ones is kind of like you have either your super fast resins or your higher detail longer resins, and the difference is like half a second versus 2 second layers. I mean, it's really gotten that good. So I'd love to. It used to be, and then part of me wants to say there's a lot of differences, but there aren't anymore. So if you have a 4K mono screen, it's not that big of a difference anymore. You can probably get by with 1 or 2 resin settings on your machine.
Okay, so then another question by Jason Burning. These are like a lot earlier on questions too. So, can you use water washable and clean it with IPA?
I don't know. I don't know. I refuse to use water washable resin because of the environmental. It's kind of a catastrophe because so many people are just getting into it and buying the water washable resins and think they can just wash them in the sink. And as I don't want to support that behavior, and I always use the IPA just because of that. I don't think I don't think the water washable resins are a good idea because there's too many users who are just going to jump into it and not do their homework and be irresponsible with it. So I've never used it. I can't say.
Okay. The next question is Jason Burning. How long can you leave resin in a printer that you're not using?
I only go about a week. It thickens up. So if you go longer than a week, you either need to cover it in some way, shape, or form, cellophane or something, or put it back in the bottle because it's gonna evaporate. And if you live in Minnesota like I do in the winter, it happens a lot faster. So I only go about a week.
Okay. Next question is going to be Tad Crawford. Are there a temperature requirement? Can I set this up in my garage?
Yes, there are temperature requirements. You should not be printing under about 65 degrees. And you don't want to be printing above, I think it's 100, around 100. Maybe someone will correct me on that one. I'm in my basement, so I have to worry about the lower end, not the upper end. Every resin will say on the side of the bottle what its preferred temperature range is, and each resin has a range. And if it's outside that range, you are going to get problems. So,
Okay. The next, Danny Taylor asked, how do you deal with warping of the model when you print? I've had issues with things like boxes coming out with the side that will be weirdly rounded.
Typically, that's because you didn't have enough supports. So if you have too few supports, then you're going to get more warping. So the supports, so chances are you need to up your supports. In that, I'd have to see the specific model, and feel free to contact me. I don't. Well, you guys have me on Discord. Honestly, if you have a problem and you want to ever blow it past me, I'm on the Reaper forums like daily, and I check Discord about once a week. So if anybody ever wants to throw a question at me, I'm a moderator on Reaper's forum, and I'm always on there. You private message me. I'm more than willing to look at something that happened and give you some advice. So
Okay, next question is Alex Stringer. Do you generally fill your build plate every time you print?
good question. No, maybe sometimes. Lately I have been because I've been printing so much for I've been doing so much printing for Dark Sword lately that I've been filling all the build plates. But no, I print what I need to when I need to. I actually have found with the Sonic Mini 4K, the compared to my old Photon, the FEP tray, the resin tray is smaller compared to the build plate size, so there's not as much space between the edges and the build plate. Because of that, if you fill the plate all the way to the edge, there's not enough room for the FEP to flex. And I get, let's see if I have an example. I get some interesting little rip outs on the edges of the leading edge or the back edge. I'm not sure which one it is. One of the edges of the build plate kind of gets a little bit of rip out because of that. And so I've been actually not filling the plate all the way up. I'm actually trying to keep like a quarter-inch or half-inch margin around the edges of the build plate just to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Okay, next up, William Greco. You built your fume hood. Do you know of any prepackaged fume hood setups out there for those without a handy bone in their body?
If you like spending a lot of money, I don't know of any under like $400 or $500. I mean, if you want to use like an airbrush hood, you can get one for like $100 or so. Um, I actually have one over there, but it's just like it's got a little tube that goes out, but it's too small to fit the whole thing into, so it would just be at the opening of it. I know George Lukac, he's on there talking right now. He uses that, and it works pretty good for him. So it just kind of pulls the fumes away at the bottom, so you just you can go on Amazon, look up airbrush spray, portable airbrush spray hood or whatever. I think they're like 120 bucks. They're really nice. I can see them working really good for this. You just set it at the side of your area and let it run, and it'll just pull everything. You just put it out a window. It's got a little thing that fits in the crack of a window, and it would work really well. That would be the way I'd go if you don't want to spend hundreds and hundreds on a professional fume hood.
Okay. And actually in chat, someone said that they use a cheap kitchen range hood for 100.
Yep, that would work too.
Okay, and then next question is Rob G. What is average cost to print a single model versus paying someone on Etsy, for example? 3D printing seems expensive if you're not printing a lot.
If you're not doing a lot, like if you're not planning on doing, and this is the why do you want to do this? If you're only looking at a few models a year or even a model or two a month, go off of Etsy. Seriously. This is a lot of, if you're not going to get into this because you want the fun of printing and the fun of making these things yourself and all that stuff, it's not for you. Go buy it from, pay somebody, because yeah, you're only going to be paying, you know, 50 cents a miniature in resin or 10 cents a miniature in resin, but you also have to factor the $400 cost of the printer and the $50 bottle cost for the bottle of IPA, and the wash and cure machine is $100, and the vent hood and all this other stuff. So you got to print a lot of miniatures to make that money up. Now, here's the caveat to that. You can print miniatures that cannot be cast on a 3D printer. So as a sculptor, I can sculpt things and print them and paint them that are far more dynamic in one piece than I can ever do and deliver it to Reaper or Dark Sword for casting, because the casting has to be done in a plane, right? Whereas 3D printing, as long as the ports can reach it, it can be printed. So there is some detail advantages that you get out of a 3D printer, that you don't get out, that you aren't going to get any other way as a modeler, right? That said, unless there's just a lot and you're going through a lot of miniatures and you want to print a ton, like you're doing army and doing a lot of stuff, and this is a major hobby for you side thing, right? At least for a while, it's probably better off to go with one of the Etsy printers. I don't know how many of you know Mori Hava. Her and her husband have started their own Etsy business doing that ourselves. She prints for a lot. They print a lot of stuff themselves, and that's actually become a business for them. They've got a print farm, and they're doing that. They're using these printers as well. And I think that's a way to go for somebody if you don't want to do more. You got to be wanting to do quite a few minis to really get into this, right? So I would, or want to just be in part of the hobby. Like you have the money and it's fun for you to do this printing, right? Or you've got a game group that you can print for, right? You have extra people you want to print for yourself. It is pretty expensive to get into it, and there is an overhead. So, but that said, it's fun. It is a fun hobby itself. It's really cool to see these things come to life, So if you're sculpting it all, if you're a miniature sculptor, you need to get one, because it'll up your sculpting game, your digital sculpting game, because you'll be able to see what comes out.
Okay. Then next up is Joshua Horn. He asked, I had a slight family issue, so I missed part of the beginning. Can you go over again very quickly differences from the Sonic 4K and Sonic 4K Mighty? I bought a Mighty and contemplating getting a regular 4K now as well.
Detail. So the Mighty is so it projects the image up onto, so you lose some detail. Mighty is going to give you a much larger build plate. You can print big things, terrain, that sort of thing, but you're going to have the detail of, say, like a Bones Black miniature on that one. Whereas the Mini 4K is going to give you the quality of a master print, like something that you can't even necessarily buy in metal or whatever. I'm literally using it to print masters to go on the mold to make metal miniatures, right? So it's the highest quality. Essentially the Mini 4K, if I can sculpt it, I can print it. It's the first printer out there that I can say that, period.
Okay. Then next up is Caitlin Harper. Would you recommend 3D printing with apartment life?
No. I just can't. I can't. I'd have to know what your apartment was like, I guess. I wouldn't want it in my living space, personally. Unless you have an extra bathroom that you can convert just to that and not have any toothpaste or anything else around it.
Okay. Next up is Dag Eric Haugen. Thoughts on NFEP versus regular FEPs?
NFEP. When the Sonic Mini 4K comes, the FEP that comes with it is a piece of junk. I was having tons of rip outs and stuff, and a friend recommended I grab the Epex NFEP, bought it, put it on without changing any of the settings. I have had very few failures ever since I did that. I don't know what they got on it, but it's amazing and it works great. So yeah, if you get a Sonic Mini 4K, I strongly suggest that when you order, you also order the Epex NFEP, and before you even print with it, you rip the FEP off that's on it and put a new FEP on, put an NFEP on. It's worth it. It's worth the hassle.
Okay. Before I continue questions, I'm just going to make sure everyone vote on the poll just to make sure we get a pick it. You guys can pick a winning faction. And now on to the next question. Thomas Olson, what do you think is the viability of a small business based on original STLs and printed originals plus licensed ones?
Fairly viable, honestly. It's messy enough of a thing. If you're willing to get into it and build your own little print farm and market yourself and sell your own, sell some original STLs and then licensed ones and buy the licenses and sell them to hobbyists. There's a lot of hobbyists who want these models, and there's a lot of models that the only way you get them is to 3D print them. but not everybody's going to be able to do this technology. They really aren't, not yet. It'll be quite a few years before this becomes clean, safe, and something you can put anywhere. So I think there's going to be at least a considerable amount of time before where there's going to be a need for people to print, to find people to print these models for them, because there's going to be hobbyists who want the models, but they certainly aren't going to want to print them themselves or have the overhead of it.
So, kind of a tag-on question that's actually in the chat was by Andrew Mystic. Do you think it would be viable for a game store to buy a 3D printer and sell printing services to its customers?
Absolutely. I think it'd be brilliant.
I actually completely agree.
I
It's on
I
my
think
consideration.
Yeah, I honestly think game stores should be doing that. I think that'd be fantastic. I mean, can you imagine? Now they're going to have to, like, come, they scroll down, just set up a kiosk, let people pick it, they pay for it, and come back the next day and pick it up. Or let it call them when it's done. And you can even offer other services like cleaning of the model and stuff. You can either give it to them supported and leave the sports on, cure it for them, and let them figure out how to get the sports off and clean it, or you can offer them cleaning services too, and even have an upset charge on that. I mean, my relationship with Dark Sword, I get paid to clean the models for them and remove supports and get them ready for printing. You could do the same thing as a game store, and offer additional. It would be a way for a game store to get some additional revenue, honestly.
Okay, and then next question would be Joshua Rourke. You've sold me on the Frozen 4K Mini. Link to your settings. He's asking for a link to the settings for it.
Oh, on my 4K Mini. Um, yeah, you know what? I'll take a snippy of my settings and I'll post them on my Discord after I'm done here. How's that sound?
Okay, the next question is Ramon Goldbreath. I'll get some SOR of white residue. Oh, some sort of white residue on my prints. Do you know what this is from and how I can get rid of it?
Yeah, you're curing them while they've still got water or alcohol on them. They got to be completely dry when you cure them. If you had any alcohol on your fingers and touched them, or oils from your fingers and stuff, before you cured them, that also will cause that. You,
Okay.
you, you got to wait till they're completely dry to cure them. I had that problem when I first started too.
Okay. Yeah, she's even responding. Thank you. Several people are. The next question is Lance Katz. What is recommended for those who have apartments or like myself who have limited space? I have a tiny house and limited windows in the basement. Also have work shed, but it's not heated. I wasn't sure where to ask the question, so there you go.
I don't know what to say. I personally am not sure I could get into this technology under those circumstances. Um, it's not something you want to mess with your health over. You need to be able to vent somehow. If you have the ability to punch a hole through the wall and put a dryer vent in, through, and be able to vent that way, yes. I mean, right there, I punched a hole through the wall and I'm venting. And I put a little, but I own the house, so I can do that, right? Um, if you can link it to a dryer vent in like I said, a bathroom, but you don't want to be brushing teeth next to this thing, right? So it's got to be a clean space, a space that you can clean, and it's got to be able to be vented. Those, in my opinion, those are the minimums. Like I said, you'll find people all over the internet talk about that, and there's attachments that they've made that charcoal takes the fumes that are coming out of the machine, takes it away, and all that stuff. That doesn't change the fumes from your cleanup rags and from your washing and all that other stuff, right? So I honestly cannot recommend it for small space living. I just can't. Sorry.
Okay. Then next up is Aaron Lovejoy. Hello, Aaron.
Hey, Aaron.
What resin do you use if you want to game with your miniature?
The same as I use for Dark Sword. My favorite, because has become my favorite because it's fairly cheap. It can be cast into miniatures. It can game. It's more durable than. Will it crack and break? Yes, but it's far more durable. It's it's Frozen's Aqua Gray 4K resin, If you got a Sonic Mini 4K, it's the one that they recommend for it anyway. Man, it's a great resin. It really is. Holds amazing detail. Aaron, I can't wait to see what you paint coming off of that thing. It holds amazing detail. It, from a gaming miniature perspective, it's a little bit more durable than a typical resin miniature. Which is why it can also handle casting. Yeah, I can't sing the praises of that resin high enough. I love it.
Okay, and then the next one is also Aaron saying, I have a Fosen 4 like you. Okay, so next question is Glenn Harris. What was the name of the resin that could be put in the vulcanized molds?
That one. So, Anycubic Aqua Gray 4K.
Okay. Then Andrew Mystic Fortress asked, I'm the owner of a small game store. Have you heard of the other stores installing printers? Oh, so he asked that in the chat as well.
Okay.
So print services. Next up is Peter Shaw. I'm not going to have a safe place to put a printer for at least 9 to 12 months. Are there any new printer technologies I should be looking forward to?
Oh, heavens, yes. That is something maybe I should have mentioned and didn't. This industry is growing fast, man. I mean, you can't keep up the innovations. I mean, I think EPAC's just announced that they're coming out or have come out with a 5K screen now. I know they're working on 8K screens. Okay, so the cool thing about that, I mean, let's think about that, is you're now going to have almost a 12-inch print bed screen, which means you're going to get the detail of a Sonic Mini 4K on a 12-inch print bed. You're going to get that kind of detail on things that you can print full dragons on without parts. You're going to be able, when they get to a 12-inch screen, you're going to be able to print something the size of T-Rock without having to, with only maybe having the wings off. That's amazing. I mean, I'm sorry, I freak out. That's really cool. That's probably going to be coming next year. I assume by next fall you're going to start seeing that kind of thing on the market. And at that point, you're also going to see 24-inch beds because they're going to be able to, because they're going to be able to project an 8K screen up to close to 24 inches, right? 20 inches. So you'll be able to print pirate ships on resin. So the resin so that size is going to be changing here, and while keeping detail is coming. The other thing that I've heard a few little like rumblings about is that they're talking about taking the higher quality screens like you have an iPhone, like on your phone, those you does anybody. It's going to add cost, not really distinguish that is for them. Advancements to come. I think the next then big don't have to come ways are easier to use and that's it. Are we still there?
We're having internet issues on this end
Hello?
for all of the classes. I'm not sure if anyone can hear me. Um, if you can
Okay,
hear
I
me,
got
that's
you now.
good. Okay, so yeah, we're having massive internet
Yep.
issues now. So
Oh no.
I'd say to save the internet, since the class is technically past its time, all further questions can be
Yep.
posted into your Discord.
Yep. So yeah, come see me on our break here. The links and start posting some of my settings that I have and get them up for you guys. So I'll do that this afternoon, probably in a half hour or so. All right. Been fun talking to you. Thanks for taking the class. I appreciate all your thank yous, and I hope it was good for you.
And before you close the class, can you hand it over to me and I'll try to close it down before it crashes?
Sure. How do I hand it over? Let me see.
Under participants, you'll select me as a and make me host.
Gotcha. What's your name again?
Well, it's the Reaper class 3 or 4, classroom 4.
Gotcha. Gotcha. There you go.
Awesome. Okay. And now I'm going to close on the pool, and everyone have a wonderful day. Sorry for cutting it short. We're having issues here, so.
No, we should have, that was good. I think we were winding down anyway. So
Awesome.
thank you. Thanks for hosting.
No problem, and thank you for everyone showing up, and thank you for the information, because I was learning.
Excellent.
Wait, why are you ending it early?